Well, good morning, brothers. The text we're going to be working on today is James 3, 1 through 5. Once again, that's James 3, 1 through 5. In the 1700s, there was a really feared disease, and it was called chickenpox. And it was the most feared disease known to man. It was very common, and 40% of everybody who caught that disease died within about 5 to 15 days. At one point in Europe, 400,000 people a year were dying from it, including 5 kings who were reigning at the time. Unfortunately, there was no treatment or vaccine for smallpox at that time, and it's estimated that between 300 and 500 million people died as a result of smallpox from the beginning of history until it was finally eradicated. There was an English doctor, his name was Edward Jenner, and he noticed that milkmaids who were in close contact with cows rarely if ever caught the disease. And this really unique and unrelated discovery actually launched him into a period of research over about 17 years to where they finally discovered the vaccine for smallpox. This small discovery literally saved millions of lives. In 1979, the World Health Organization declared that smallpox had been eradicated, and it was significant since that was one of only 2 diseases to ever have been eradicated in the history of the world. These seemingly small things can have an incredible impact on the world and those around us. In the same way, the tongue can have a profound effects on the lives of people. It's a small organ capable of influencing lives, families, nations, and the world. So what does the Bible say about the tongue? Let's take a look at our text today. Again, that's James 3, 1 through 5. My brethren, let not many of you become teachers, knowing that we shall receive a stricter judgment. For we all stumble in many things. If anyone does not stumble in word, he is a perfect man, able also to bridle the whole body. Indeed, we put bits in horses' mouths that they may obey us, and we turn their whole body. Look also at ships. Although they are so large and are driven by fierce winds, they are turned by a very small rudder wherever the pilot desires. Even so, the tongue is a little member and boasts great things. See how great a force a little fire kindles. So the first point I want to share with you today from the text is the warnings about an uncontrolled tongue. And in verse 1, it says, My brethren, let not many of you become teachers. And evidently what was going on at the time is this was a real problem. People were seeing the prestige and the honor given to teachers and given to pastors, and so they wanted to do that. Paul mentions in 1 Timothy 1:7, desiring to be teachers of the law, understanding neither what they say nor the things which they affirm. So what they had is a situation where people wanted the prestige without the calling. They wanted to bring attention to themselves and seeking glory for themselves instead of seeking to glory and honor God. And if we look in verse 1 through 2 a little bit farther on, it talks about the reason for the warning. And it says, knowing that we shall receive a stricter judgment, for we all stumble in many things. Now, looking at the Greek word here, it's not the usual one. It's one that denotes a sin in word or in speech. And what you find here is that, this is a strict warning for us because there's a greater responsibility for teachers because we can lead the flock astray. A good example of that can be found in Jim Jones, David Koresh. Them using their tongues, they actually led, many people to their death. Tools of the tongue for the teacher, the tools of the trade for the teacher is the tongue. And that's why we have to be very careful as we use it. We also need to check our own reasons. Here at School of Ministry, at this point we should have pure motives, but sometimes people have the desire for the adoration of men and not wanting to serve and please God. So having discussed the warnings about an uncontrolled tongue, let's go to the next part. And that's the second point that I wanted to leave you with today, and that's the effects of a controlled tongue. And it says in James 3:2, if anyone does not stumble in word, he is a perfect man. And what this does is this illustrates spiritual maturity in a person. And the word perfect here is one who has reached the proper height of virtue and integrity. And it's essentially someone who's spiritually mature. And a good example of this is as you're walking down the street and you see a guy who's a bodybuilder, well, you're going to see he's got these thick calves, he's got really big biceps, and that's an outward sign of his physical maturity and his physical strength. And so with us, a controlled tongue is a demonstration of our spiritual strength. A mastered tongue also demonstrates control over the flesh. In verse 2 it says, also able to bridle the whole body. And bridle is a metaphor for holding yourself in check and restraining oneself. And a really good example of this is our dog. We have a dog named Buddy. Buddy's a cockapoo. He's about 25 pounds and just a little tiny guy, but he is super strong. And whenever we'd go for a walk, he would literally pull arms out of the arm socket because he's so excited, he's so ready to go for that walk. And my wife couldn't even carry him or take him for a walk. It was more like Buddy was taking her for a walk. And what we did is we got a special harness, a bridle, that we put on him. And so instead of him racing forward, this thing controlled him to where it was a nice, pleasant walk. He'd just walk alongside us instead of basically trying to run around. And so the question I have is, do we have control over our whole body? If not, maybe it's because we don't have control over our tongues. So having looked at the effects of a controlled tongue, let's continue. And this is the third point for today. Illustrations of a controlled tongue. You know, we all love illustrations, and when it comes directly from the Bible, it's even better. In verse 3 it says, indeed, we put bits in horses' mouths that they may obey us, and we turn their whole body. And you really need to get the concept of what he was talking about here. When you have these large war horses, these aren't little ponies that you put your kids on and, you know, they go around, you can probably pick them up. These are huge, incredible animals. They're usually about 6 feet tall and weigh around 2,000 pounds, which is approximately about 10 of me, depending on how well I'm doing on my diet. But the point of these horses was not just to carry somebody from one point to another, but it was also as a weapon. They were used to smash into opponents as you're going on the battle, crush people, and things like that. And if you can imagine having a 2,000-pound animal smashing into you in battle or stepping on you, there's a good chance you're not going to get up from that. However, that huge animal of war is able to be controlled by a 5-inch bit put in their mouth. And that's what they're talking about here in this illustration. The second illustration is rudders in a ship, and that's in verse 4, and it says, look also at ships. Although they are so large and driven by fierce winds, they are turned by a very small rudder wherever the pilot desires. And it's important to understand what kind of ships they're talking about. They're not talking about the little dinghies and the little cruisers that you see around Newport Harbor. They're talking about huge, massive ships. The Roman Galeon is typically a ship that has between 50 and 80 rowers. So these are guys sitting, you know, one in front of another who are rowing, you know, lined up on both sides of the boat. And some of them were even larger than that. They had catapults on them, and they would actually have 4 to 6 rows of oarmen. So you'd have maybe 20 guys, and then another row of 20 guys, and another row of 20 guys. Just this huge, massive ship that was driving, going around the ocean. And I didn't realize this, but in the study discovered that the Mediterranean is one of the stormiest and most dangerous waters in the northern hemisphere. And so what you have are these massive ships of war built to survive extremely dangerous waters, yet they're controlled by a tiny little device called the rudder. These two graphic illustrations by James show how massive instruments of war can be controlled by very tiny objects. So too our lives can be dominated by the small organ called the tongue. So we've seen how the controlled tongue can guide a person. Let's look at the last point found in the text, and that's the effects of an uncontrolled tongue. An uncontrolled tongue demonstrates a lack of maturity. In verse 5 it says, even so the tongue is a little member and boasts great things. Now we've seen how powerful the tongue can be in the life of a believer who's spiritually mature and has it under control. This is the contrast to see on the flip side what it looks like of an uncontrolled tongue. And the word boast there is, sometimes you think, boasting, maybe it's not nice, but it can still be about good things. In this case, the word really means talking big, arrogant, egotistical, where it seems to denote a kind of haughty language which wounds and provokes others and stirs up strife. So it's really important you understand what he's talking about there. A couple passages in Scripture that talk about this, Psalm 94:4, where it talks about they utter speech and speak insolent things. All the workers of iniquity boast in themselves. And in Matthew 15:18 it says, but those things which proceed out of the mouth come from the heart, and they defile a man. So an uncontrolled tongue ignites strife and problems. The text says, see how great a forest a little fire kindles. And I'll tell you, this was very convicting to me, and God was really working in my life as I was going through that, and just watching the words that I say and the people that I talk to and how that I talk to them. And so it should be for us as well. The word see here is an adjective that's used, and it's not used that often in the New Testament. Paul uses it only 9 times in all of his writings. And it's like, see, behold. It's like a real, boom, this is a sharp contrast. I really want you to get the concept of this, and that's why he uses that word. And it's a contrast linking us back to the illustrations found in verse 3 and 4 of the horses and the boats. But this time it's in a negative and destructive way. Back in 2003, the Providence of British Columbia had a huge, devastating fire. It was the worst one they'd ever had in their country or in that province. It had displaced 45,000 people, destroyed 239 homes, and it burned 61,000 acres. And to get a perspective of what that is, that's the entire city of Costa Mesa, Santa Ana, and the entire area of the city of Irvine, which you know is a huge area. And that whole area was burned and destroyed. What was the cause? A cigarette butt, about that big. Proverbs 26:21 says, as charcoal is to burning coals and wood to fire, so is a contentious man to kindle strife. So the question we have that we need to look at with ourselves today is, do we have control over our tongues? Are we engaging in jokes? Are we engaging in gossip? Are we, when we speaking to others, are we considering how our words may have an impact on their lives? Are we saying things that are meant to be deceitful, even though on the surface they seem okay? In the congregation and as we minister to others, we really need to look at how our words have an impact on others, because we can cause people to stumble. We can cause people to have all kinds of problems in their life, because it's like, oh, he's a Christian, but guy, he just really hurt me and tore me down and ripped me a new one. I don't want anything to do with that. So it's really important that we are considerate of our tongue and watchful of it. So to recap, we've seen the warnings from God about the tongue. We've seen the evidences of a controlled tongue in the life of a spiritually mature person. We've seen examples of how a little device like the rudder or a biddle can control a powerful animal or a ship of war. We've seen the destructive power of uncontrolled tongue. And more importantly, we've seen examples and talked about how an uncontrolled tongue can have a devastating impact in the lives of others. The good news is that no matter what offense we cause or sin we succumb to, God is willing and able to forgive us for that. And not only that, but give us the power and the ability to control our tongue. Philippians 4:13, I can do all things through Christ who strengthens me. If we rely on that strength, brothers, we can control our tongue. The thing I want to leave you with is what was said in Psalms 139:23. And this should be our desire. Search me, O God, and know my heart. Try me and know my anxieties. Guys, let's be ready to put God's biddle in our mouth today. Thank you.